Hi everybody, I'm back again, and I'm here to low energy today, but I got quite a bit to go through because it's a bigger chapter. For those of you just tuning in, my name is Beth, and I am currently reading an alternate manuscript. I've already published this one. I'm not the writer; that was my father. And he wrote one version of this back in 1977, and then he wrote another version in 1982, and that is what I'm reading today because I want to kind of see whether I should amalgamate the two stories, or maybe just do a special edition with this one. I'm not really sure yet. But I am currently on chapter 11. So if you haven't listened to any of the past broadcasts, go back and listen to the first one so that you can kind of get caught up on the story, because otherwise you're not going to understand what's going on. Alrighty, I'm, like I said, dealing with low energy, so I'm going to try and knock it out of the park as best I can right now, dealing with what I got. So. The name of the story is called The Guardian of the Sword. It's a fantasy novel. So, without further ado, Chapter 11. So far as is known, Rorik is the first of the Guardians to make use of the greater powers of the sword, though there are some rumors and fragmentary ballads regarding Arvindal. It is said that the sword cares for its wielder, giving to the wielder the knowledge necessary for the use of his powers. Some have gone so far as to say that this proves that the sword is the master. The wielder is but a puppet. None of the Guardians has ever expressed an opinion on this subject. The Book of the Sword by Karan Barandus. In the morning before the attack on the city, a man walked into the Asbalanian camp from the south. He was tall and blond, square-featured, and he smiled seldom. He wore a chain war shirt, and a helmet, and he seemed like another free warrior. He bore no shield, but through the red and blue sash at his waist were thrust two swords of dwarvish make. The camp guards brought him to the prince and the guardian, for such has been his request, and he spoke to them thus: I am sometimes called Donal the Bane, sometimes Donal Two-Sword. I was brought to this land from a land far away, brought by a spell, and by a spell I am required to bring some special knowledge to the magician known as the Old One. When that obligation is discharged, I will be allowed to fight in whatever battle you fight here today. The Old One, who had been standing there, extended a finger towards the young man and spoke. Shalak de Flun, Rodeshk, Trilek, Flonha, Tyrelech. I think it's the last part. A sudden flare burst between the two, and as Baln's men fell back in wonderment, the old magician and the young warrior regarded each other. Donal smiled grimly. Aye, Old One, I spoke the truth, and I have a magic of my own. But have you unearthed some moldering book of the Arkbaz-Dwazar, with a spell to tell you what my news is? The Old One bowed to Connell and Rorik, and took the young man off to speak privately with him. The rest of the host began to form up in the battle array. The Hygerians by now had seen the smallness of the force set against them, and so decided to test them. The gate opened, and 200 cavalry trotted out, accompanied by 500 infantry. The cavalry, though, did not form with the infantry, but by some wild whim of their commander, began an immediate attack on the king's horsemen. The king's horsemen had been testing a new style of fighting in their small patrol actions. Each man, in addition to his bow and arrows and sword, bore a 12-foot lance slung across his back. Each man also had a small round shield slung at his saddle, balancing the bow case, as it were. Seeing the direction of the cavalry attack, they strung bows and began shooting. At what they felt to be a safe enough distance, they slung their bows at their saddles, unslung their spears, and charged. Their shields were small, smaller than many felt comfortable with, but it was necessary that they be able to handle their shields swiftly and easily. Their maneuverability was intended to compensate for their size. The long lances completed the work that the Arcarian bows had begun among the Hygerians. Many of the Dark Ones did not even attempt to come to grips with the horsemen, even those of them who had lances themselves. Of the 200 who had ridden out, only 80 or so rode back in through the city gates. In the meantime, 300 infantry had advanced to meet the Hygerian on foot. With 50 Icarians loosing arrows over their heads into the dark-cloaked ranks. The Hygerians managed some sort of answer to this when the range close enough for their javelins. The two lines came together with a ringing crash. For a moment, there seemed to be no movement. Then the Hygerians appeared to have fallen back a bit. Another moment later, it was sure that they had fallen back, for behind the firm Asbalaunian line were black-cloaked bodies. Suddenly the horsemen, having conclusively driven the Hygerian cavalry off, returned to strike into the rear of the barbarian infantry. In a moment, the Hygerians had panicked and were scattered and running for the gate. One small group, about 50 strong, held in a circle or retired steadily toward the gate, presenting a solid front toward any attackers. They used their javelins as thrusting spears to keep off the cavalry. They retired before the infantry. They suffered the arrows, but they continued to move, presenting a solid face of fury to attackers. About 40 of them reached the gate, whereas most of those who had fled in panic were cut down from behind. Over 200 Hygerian dead lay on the field when the gate was closed. Rourke looked at Connell. If they were to take that little band and use them as an example for the rest, and train the rest to do as well, they would destroy us. True enough, I would have preferred to see them all dead on the field, but I admire that group. They did not panic or trust their feet to save them, but knew that the only way to escape was to fight whatever came, and they succeeded. Rourke nodded. Their foot continues to improve, but they did not yet attempt the necessity of good infantry. By this time, the horsemen were amusing themselves by riding near the walls to shoot at any Hygerian who dared show himself. The catapults were finally being positioned, and the huge one facing the main gate was being supplied with large boulders. A man appeared, standing on the wall, dressed in flowing black robes. 2 warriors stood on either side of him with large shields. He pointed a finger and shouted a word which shuddered in the air. There was a screaming hiss as a fireball flew forth, growing in size until it struck down a horseman, burning him and his horse to a lump of cinder. Again he spoke the word, and again a ball of screaming orange fire burned a horse and rider. By the time the 3rd fireball was thrown, the horsemen were racing in confusion away from the walls. Rourke rode to one of the catapults, meeting the crew as they abandoned it. He blocked their path, and when they looked up into his face, they hesitated only a moment before they returned to their machine. Rourke directed them as they turned to the machine to aim at the warlock on the wall. Some claimed later that he could divine the thoughts of men, and perhaps so, or perhaps it was only that he looked to the places where men remained at their posts. However it was, the next ball of fire struck that catapult. Some of the men were shielded by the machine, but all of them suffered burns. For some reason he could not establish, Rourke found himself riding forward. the sword bare across his saddle, past the flaming ruin of the catapult. He saw the finger point at him, heard the word pronounced. He held the sword upright in his hand, and he felt only a little warmth on his face as the fireball disappeared on the instant of touching the sword. Again a fireball flew, and again it disappeared into the sword. He was aware of the tingling coming from the hilt of the sword, but it was no unpleasant feeling. A third fireball flew, with no more effect, and Rorik began to wonder if there was a way to strike back. Then, from the ruby pommel of the sword, a beam of crimson flared. It first smote down the warlock on the wall, leaving him not even time to cry out, and without touching his shield bearers. Rorik played the beam over a section of the wall, and wherever it touched, the stone turned white to white crumbling powder. Suddenly as it had come, the red ray died away. Even as it did, 10 yards of wall where the ray had touched fell in a heap. Rorik rode back. Connell had rallied the horsemen, preventing them, the powers alone knew how, from riding with all speed back to the hills, and steadied the rest of the war host. The Guardian rode to the infantry lines and found Buran. He and the 10 who had escaped Aventure were each leaders due to their experience, troops of the men. Rorik called them forth by name and spoke to them. I require 200 men, swiftly, to go through that breach in the wall. Let each of you find me 20 men, all volunteers, by the time I return. He rode back to Connell. What did you do? Asked the prince. What strange power is it that you have there? I only know that it came to me when it was needed. It performed the deed necessary, and it is gone now. May I have your permission to take 200 men inside, either to open the gates from the inside or to hold the area around the breach until we can be reinforced? Permission? Rorik, you need not ask my permission for such a foray. Only inform me before you leave. The old one was beside them then, and Donnell with him. My Lord King Guardian, Donnell has brought me tidings which I shall consider for some time. You may trust him immediately, or you may trust him completely. Rorik looked at him. What do you know of the spell this wizard used? Need we fear more of this sort? Neither I nor my colleagues who are assisting me have ever seen the like. It appears that this man has somehow acquired a spell which acts quickly enough to be of use on a field of battle. Given time, we might have discovered its secret and destroyed its effectiveness, but the sword has served you well. It has indeed. But now we go to try whether we can open the gates of Orden. I think this will work for men and swords more than spells. Donnell broke his silence then. My lord, may I go with you? My Lord Guardian, may I go with you? Rorik looked down and saw the cold bitterness in the blue eyes. You would fight with me then? Aye, if it be your wish. I would be a shield for your right side so long as I live, Guardian. They returned to the infantry, finding them waiting patiently, formed in ranks and ready to attack. Rorik dismounted and took up a beside him. The warrior drew the sash, spinning in the air, and left in the air right and left hilts as they came. He was smiling, held little mirth. Self has declared that you are far from Donnell. Your life and a cause is little to you. There is more. At an inn, marched from the rest of Tanara. Who walked with me is wounded in a village. I hate their own reasons. Rorik nodded. Donnell battle with the two. I too much endure a young man. Raising the sword in hand and started. Donnell was as they ran. men, small clue about. They all searched. As Balin they reached the bridge, as they slew the rebels, but those riding on by Roar and the two weapon at him, but all they made but did. And gate, Rashad whom the cobble tips the Syrians gate, whereas through the Syrian rebels, care even for the high break they had all of the sick, the high part, and when they have known who might give hawk with the bat, so and be a massins, knives, too, and other well among the shoulder. The 50 those survived still stood, suffered knee, wounded, gave, and they're all who from the with the prayer at people the immediate now as he approached